I'd like to recognize the Honorable Rubén Berríos Martínez, President of the Puerto Rican Independence Party.
Yes, good morning to you. The bill under consideration as it stands is unacceptable and destined to failure. The experience of the last 20 years demonstrates that Congress will not enact legislation that directly or indirectly promises statehood to Puerto Rico, as does HR2499. Aversion to statehood for Puerto Rico is the main obstacle to the approval of this legislation, even though few members of Congress would publicly admit it. No one wants to be perceived as anti-democratic or politically incorrect. Some prominent members of this House have already advanced that there is no consensus among Puerto Rico's political parties as an excuse to stall even the consideration of this measure. But Congress should not point to lack of consensus in Puerto Rico as a pretext for inaction. Having signed and ratified the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the United States is legally bound under Article 1 of the treaty to, and I quote, promote the realization of the right of self-determination, end of quote. The right of self-determination and independence is an inalienable right of the Puerto Rican people, which can be exercised even in the face of congressional indifference or opposition. Nevertheless, the U.S. is under a moral and legal obligation to promote a process or provide a procedural mechanism through which the people of Puerto Rico can exercise this right. It should therefore enact legislation to facilitate a final status solution for Puerto Rico. Accordingly, I propose that the bill be amended to achieve two goals. First, to facilitate its approval by both the House and the Senate, and second, to accommodate the reasonable demands of the Puerto Rican political parties and organizations so that any opposition would clearly be a mere excuse not deserving any serious consideration. The amendments I propose here today, taken as a whole, provide a different and more viable approach to Puerto Rico's status problem. First of all, the language contained in the bill regarding the first vote should be amended to clarify the territorial nature of the present status. Secondly, and even more important, simultaneously with this vote, Puerto Ricans should express in the same ballot their preference for either a constituent assembly or a plebiscite as the mechanism for expressing their aspirations concerning substantial non-territorial options for our political future. Congress would then be in a position to respond to the status choice of Puerto Ricans in either a constituent assembly to be convened under the laws of Puerto Rico or a plebiscite to be convened under the laws of Puerto Rico. Consequently, the second vote in HR 2499 would be eliminated. This approach takes into account the different procedural mechanisms proposed by Puerto Rico's political parties, provides a mechanism to overcome the existing deadlock through the expression of the popular will, and bypasses the alleged lack of political consensus as a rationalization to stall the process. We may not agree on the substantive status options, but we can surely agree on a method for selecting a procedural mechanism to facilitate the solution to Puerto Rico's status problem. No one who claims to respect the will of the people should object to having the people decide whether to continue or not under the present territorial status, or that the people should decide whether the procedural mechanism for deciding on the future status should be a constituent or constitutional assembly or a referendum. That is precisely what we're proposing here today. We acknowledge, furthermore, the grave political reality that the U.S. Congress will not act on status unless it has to unless it is forced to. But Congress, by inaction, will not be able to avoid confronting Puerto Rico's status problem, at least not this time. If Congress does not legislate, the pro-state leadership has made clear that it will hold a local plebiscite or referendum, which we can surely expect will be designed to elicit a result favorable to statehood. Either Congress approves, as we propose, a rational and fair procedural mechanism to solve Puerto Rico's colonial problem, or it allows irrational forces propelled by circumstantial majorities to control the process. To conclude, let me bring before you an important final consideration. The Puerto Rican colonial problem affects the foreign relations of the United States with Latin America. Last week, at the initiative of 9 Latin American and Caribbean countries, the UN Committee on Decolonization approved a unanimous resolution which requires the U.S. to comply with its decolonizing obligations with respect to Puerto Rico, in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 1514-15. Similarly, 33 of Latin America's most important political parties, representing a very wide ideological spectrum, also recently approved a similar resolution. The national interest of the United States, as proclaimed by President Barack Obama in the Summit of the Americas 2 months ago, demands a new relationship with Latin America. For Latin America, Puerto Rico's colonial status is a symbol of outdated and discredited imperial policies. The issue is, and has always been, how far does the southern border of the U.S. extend into Latin America and the Caribbean? If the U.S. aspires to establish a new relationship with Latin America based on mutual respect and cooperation, it must squarely face and actively contribute to the solution of the colonial problem of Puerto Rico, a Latin American nation. Thank you very much.